I'm calling to order the special meeting of the Vacancy Board, and I want to recognize the Honorable Mayor, Sean Schultz.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. Just to do some housekeeping, of course, the vacancy board met on Saturday in the absence of the chair and approved the rules. I think both of the applicants were here that day, so we don't need to go over those rules. Predominantly the same rules that we have at the council meeting. A little bit of a change here is, of course, all the rest of the vacancy board, meaning me and council, had the benefit of being here for your initial interview. How we're going to proceed, just as a reminder, is to have the vacancy board chair, Ms. Brown, interview you with any additional questions. She's had the opportunity to watch the video and review your applications, and we'll have some additional question or more to ask of you. And then council and I will have an additional opportunity to ask any questions. Then we'll again uh, be able to have an opportunity to speak our minds, provide any comments before we would go to the ballots and vote. So then I'll turn it back to you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. I just have a couple questions that I wanted to ask you. Have you thought about a plan on how we might address the lack of public transportation in Carlisle? Can we start with you, Rachel?
Can you hear me? Okay. Um, Hi, welcome. Thank you all for attending. To address your question about public transportation in Carlisle, I think it's really twofold, which is public transportation in terms of motor vehicles, and then public transportation in terms of having a more pedestrian friendly, bikeable, walkable Carlisle. In terms of the latter, I think that is going to involve, of course, a robust street study analysis of traffic in Carlisle, being aware of which roads are municipal owned and that we have the capacity to actually address. And I think that's a start. I also think we already have some common places and structures in order that we can build upon. Um, for example, we have the local bus transit, and we can expand upon that. And then in terms of making Carlisle more walkable, bikeable, pedestrian friendly area, which in turn I think encourages things such as carpooling, more commuter friendly, accessible Carlisle. Generally, we have taken steps for that. And I think that does involve looking at things such as bike infrastructure and how can we do that in a safe, nuanced way that involves pre existing infrastructure here in Carlisle and is cognizant of the growing push for cyclists. And I was reviewing recently our comprehensive plan, and I know that there has been discussion about for example, having parking spots for bicyclists. And so, like, taking those proactive steps to encourage a more walkable, livable city is a first action step. And I think that really works in tandem with, of course, I think there's always a concern with traffic in any area you live, but especially in Carlisle, there's a growing concern with speeding, and there's been discussion within the borough council and just with civilians about how can we kind of circumvent speeding and make Carlisle a more safe, walkable area. And I think there's again infrastructure answers to that question, which involve roundabouts, stop signs, evaluations of our pre-existing speed limits, especially in areas of high traffic. And those are, of course, just initial first steps that, in tandem with kind of street analysis and kind of traffic studies, we can give you a wider answer about how do we then further build upon our pre-existing transit and public accommodations for either motorists or walking in Carlisle to make it a more transit friendly environment. Thank you.
Robert?
Thank you. Yes, I thought about this quite extensively. When I worked at Hack for last spring, I took the bus to Harrisburg, and I took my bike on the bus, and then biked from the Harrisburg bus station to Hack. It takes longer to ride the bus to Hack from Carlisle than it does to bike there, which is it's I think an hour and a half bike ride, and it's I think almost 2 hours on the bus. The fastest way outside of a car is to do what I did, was put my bike on the bus, which I regularly occurred in. There are regular occurrences where the buses were running so infrequently that I would be on the bus, the bike rack would be full, and there'd be somebody waiting at a stop, and they couldn't get on because they couldn't put their bike on the bus, and it was already full. And so I think it really speaks to the need of a dramatic increase in the need of frequency of buses to Harrisburg, and particularly some of the express buses, because those are faster. The problem is that they stop running at, I think the last one that leaves Harrisburg, which I got stuck there one day, is at like 4:50 p.m. Which, if you are working a 9 to 5 job, you cannot take the bus to Harrisburg, and so that's a really important way to open up access to careers in Harrisburg for people who are commuting there. And it's also a way to reduce, highway congestion on 81, on 76. It's kind of like to me, it's a no-brainer. That's it, and that's really just where we need to start. We really also need to start thinking about how do we connect to other, particularly other boroughs, other areas that are dense and walkable, like Mechanicsburg, Boiling Springs, Shippensburg, even Mount Holly, and even up into, if North Middleton is willing to, participate, even up into Slusher Village. There are areas up there that, once you get past, once you can get underneath 76, you can kind of walk around up there. It's not awful. So I think, and I have friends who live up there. They're kind of riding a bike is pretty dangerous for them. So I think that's really kind of where we need to start. And ideally, it would be best if we could eventually move to a point where we could get some sort of commuter rail running between Carlisle and Harrisburg. But I know that's that is pending a lot of things, including federal legislation, probably even. But that's kind of the sort of like long-term kind of dream, I think, of the areas, to be able to and that way people can I know my wife and I would just get rid of our only car at that point. We wouldn't need it, and I know that that would really kind of reduce the need for people to have cars in Carlisle, and be putting people who are on our streets and vulnerable at risk. So I guess that's sort of I think we need to, and I guess thinking about sort of holistically, like the type of transit system that we're putting in. Ideally it would be best if it was electrified in some capacity, or we have a plan at least to electrify that transit. If we can't get buses that are electric, and then also to think about are they do they kind of fit with the character of the town? Are they accessible to people with disabilities, and are they accessible to people with bikes who want to bring them along for the ride? So that's all.
Thank you. My second question, and start with you, Robert. In what ways have you engaged with various diverse communities? So, yeah.
Okay. So I guess I have experience in this in multiple ways. One is most of my career experience is in art education, and in higher ed, and so I'm usually working with students of diverse backgrounds all the time, and I've worked at a ton of different schools at this point, and I've always kind of worked to try to ensure that when I am presenting artists to students, that they can see themselves in those artists, that they're not just uh, you know it's whoever I'm interested in at the time, but sort of like looking to find artists that my students can relate to, no matter their background. So that's sort of one way as an art educator, I do that. As in terms of my time working at the borough, or working for the borough in a volunteer capacity, when we started on the climate action committee and the community engagement team, we were tabling during. We started tabling during kind of like the peak of the pandemic. We were holding tables at Amani, at Juneteenth, at I didn't have a table at Pride that at least I don't believe I was able to attend it, but more recently I've been attending Pride, and trying to think of like what other Unity Day. I don't know if I mentioned that. So and making sure sort of we're trying to get feedback from people about climate action, what they thought about it, because it was particularly early on for the climate action committee. We didn't have a plan yet, so it was sort of like kind of talking to people what they think about climate change, what are their, what do they want to see in this plan, and just sort of like trying to help people understand the urgency behind this problem, and that this is going to affect everybody on this planet. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, and I apologize. The mayor said you go by Mitch, so
Yeah.
I apologize. Same question, Rachel. In what ways have you engaged with various diverse communities?
Yes, ma'am. So, starting with my professional capacity, I actually work in the municipal law sector. And so, in that capacity, I have the unique opportunity to kind of see how various communities within the Commonwealth have their own unique needs, goals, and desires based on the compact of that community. So, that's just on a baseline level. And then, more importantly, at least to me, in a volunteer capacity here in Carlisle, I've had the really privilege to engage with a vast array of communities. I recently served on the Fair for Share committee with Project Share. So, food insecurity is a major project of mine, and getting the opportunity to engage firsthand with citizens struggling with that here in Carlisle in our own community really has given me the ability to kind of see the needs and struggles of people in our own home. In the same vein, I also volunteer with the YWCA, which has a lot of unique opportunities to plug in with different, unique, often marginalized communities here in Carlisle and figure out their needs and kind of how they approach this borough. In the same vein, I actually am landlord tenant mediation trained, which I think is what spurred my initial interest in using land reform and ordinances to positively impact the housing crisis just generally, but especially here in Carlisle, specifically looking at using accessory dwelling units, mixed development, etc. And I mean, talk about seeing firsthand the disparate impact and needs of diverse, often marginalized groups in our community when I worked firsthand with them, especially in a housing capacity. And then lastly, I actually am a member of the Carlisle Pride Committee, and I planned one of the Carlisle Pride events in conjunction with a few other organizations. We partnered with Eclipse Gaming Cafe, which is a small business here in Carlisle, as well as the Carlisle Area Democratic Committee. So three groups came together to form an event in which all the proceeds went to a local LGBTQ plus organization here in central Pennsylvania. So really throughout my volunteer capacity and roles, I've had the ability to connect with various groups and people to kind of see one, the diverse needs, but two, just arguably how democracy works better when people don't always look and think the same way as you. And that really is where I've gotten the base of my experience working with different people.
Thank you. I don't have any other questions, so I'm gonna look at
Okay, yeah, then we can just maybe go start with Councilor Bruce and then make our way down this way. I think that would work.
I have no additional questions. I just have one. I just want to know, in your opinion, what work do you feel you have done to earn the seat up here on Borough Council? So, what work um, in your employment, in volunteering, and what that you feel has, you know, we're going to have to vote. So, like making your case essentially. Like, what do you feel has earned your spot up here? So.
Yeah, I think we flip flop, so that would be Rachel's.
I will say I think we're both very much committed civil servants, which is great news for y'all. I think the bulk of what makes me qualified to be on borough council is that the ultimate role, in my opinion, of borough council is to serve as a spokesperson and a mouthpiece for the constituents you serve. I've had truly, since I've been in Carlisle, the blessings of being welcomed in as a community and I'm really plugged in a lot of unique facets and areas of Carlisle. And because of that, I am able to bring a diverse range of voices, opinions, and perspectives into my leadership and into my representation on Borough Council. And because of that, I think I more effectively serve as a leader and as a representative of Carlisle and the unique, ever changing needs and desires of this community.
I guess I think in terms of what I've done for to sort of earn the position up there, I think really I would say that I think the most important work I've done has been related to data analysis for the borough, particularly looking at specifically most recently crash data. We and a lot of that actually started from listening to the community. It sort of was we had organized focus groups that we ran as part of the Climate Action Commission, and those focus groups, the two we held a focus group on transportation, housing. There was one other one I think it was municipal operations, and then a sort of general climate action transportation focus group. Bob Ackerman, who was on the Climate Action Commission on community engagement, held a bicycle focus group. And I was in the hospital. My son was being born at the time, but I was able to zoom in to the meeting. And, it was, I don't know which one was better attended, the general climate action focus group or the bicycle focus group, but they were almost the same. They were about equally attended. And so to me, that was a real indication that, I think there were some very valid things that were brought up at that focus group. There were also kind of during the transportation focus group, multiple people brought up just sort of walking in the borough and how sort of, Carlisle is a very walkable place, but there are a lot of obstacles that are put in people's way. And so that's really, I sort of noticed the borough was taking on some of these traffic calming measures, and that it seemed like they were being held up a little bit, and it wasn't clear that they were moving forward. And so that's really when I started to dive into pulling PennDOT's crash data set down. Also, I should point out, there were several articles I think that Maddie Seiler produced that were about crashes that had occurred in the borough. I was familiar with how rare those crashes actually are. They're not, like, for cyclists especially, they're not very common. There are only a handful of really severe cyclist crashes when I lived in Boston, and so for a town this size, it was a little alarming to me, and that's what sort of keyed me into looking at the crash data. We are, I took all of the municipalities, so every crash in Pennsylvania, filtered it out for bicycle crashes, that ended up with somebody in the hospital or somebody who was killed, summed them together, and then looked at, basically made a scatter plot, and I sort of saw this one point that was a real extreme outlier, and I thought, well, that's like, that kind of sucks to live there. Like, it's not like not a place I would necessarily want to live. And PennDOT doesn't list the municipality names on its for its data sets. It just has a number. So I had to go in and find the number that basically was, I don't know what number it is off the top of my head, but went down the list of municipalities and found that it was Carlisle. And so for me, that was really sort of like a jarring moment, and it's not that Carlisle streets are, particularly dangerous. They, there are certain aspects about them that are dangerous, but we have a lot of cyclists here. And I think they go unnoticed. If you look at, PennDOT also has data on EVs. There are more people that ride bicycles to work in Carlisle than own EVs or plug-in hybrids combined in the zip code. And so to me, it showed that cyclists were really being underserved in the community in terms of infrastructure, and that we needed to do more to sort of make it so that they're safe, and also do outreach and teach cyclists what safe methods there are. We're working with Parks and Rec to develop safe cycling program. And then there also needs to be outreach to drivers as well, so the drivers know things that, like, you have to stop for a pedestrian at a crosswalk, or that you have to. Sorry, am I going over time?
That was 3 minutes.
Okay.
So
Right.
you're on a roll.
Okay. Um, so that they have to stop at stop at a crosswalk. They have to, um, they have to give 4 feet for cyclists. That they, really, there are certain things that they should be doing that are just the law, right? Like it's written in the Pennsylvania Title 75 of things that drivers should be doing that they don't do, and it's putting a lot of people at danger. So yeah, I guess that's. Um, I think that's sort of where I think most of my work recently has been. So.
Okay, I guess I'm up next. I have a couple questions. Um, One, this if you're appointed, we'll assume you may or may, if you run for election next year, you may or may not win. So let's say you only have from now until the end of the appointment, which is the end of next year. What are 2 things that you'd like to accomplish with that time you would have? And that's Mitch. I think you're first on this one.
I guess for me, I would like to, it's a pretty tight deadline at this point, but applying for a grant for it's a community, I have it written down here, community change grant through the EPA. I think we've been, I think one of the things I've found, particularly with community engagement on climate action, is we didn't have any funding to start with. So we had to apply for grants. Sarah Markowitz applied for the first CCLA grant through Dickinson College, which we then used to do things like distribute light bulbs and, be able to, table at events and, interact with people and sort of, buy printed off pieces of literature to distribute to people. I reapplied for that grant after Sarah stepped down, and we, so when you have access to money, you can do a lot of things in terms of sustainability. You can, help, and it's really kind of you're limited by money. It's you know, almost all these projects require require money to do, whether that's asking somebody to do it individually, or the borough supplying that money, or a grant supplying that money. Whether that's insulating homes, or providing LED light bulbs, or trying to get people to switch their heating systems to something that's more sustainable and something that is more comfortable for them. I think that's really where I think we're kind of struggling right now is sort of money. And then I think also continuing with what the borough has currently been doing in terms of its land use reform. It's looking at public transit, and then I think trying to start to plan for a district heating system. I think there's Carlisle has a large historical district. It's going to be very difficult to retrofit those buildings to the extent that they would need to be to curb their emissions. And buildings are one of the largest sources of emissions in our country, and in the borough as well, commercial and residential buildings. And so district heating is a way to sort of reduce the need for reduce the sort of reliance on insulation and weatherization for some of the older buildings where it might be more difficult to achieve the standards that we need. And I know that the borough has explored that in the past, so I'm kind of curious to look through what sort of past plans there have been, if there are any still available.
So to answer your question, I'm going to kind of focus in on specifically what I think I could accomplish, or at least lay the ground for within the next year and change, which is that I think my top 2 vision priorities would be applying for the MAP grant so that we can focus on, again, land use reform, specifically our small area plannings, and specifically targeting the areas around Northeast Street and expanding that area. Talk about gateways into Carlisle and areas that are currently a little too car oriented. That with the funding and support of the MAP grant and continuing the current steps we're taking to kind of address those small area plans, we really can expand upon. And I think that is something that is feasible within the next year and a half. And then in the same vein, I think the other program I would specifically focus on is in line with our climate action plan goals, which is to expand and continue building the foundation for a wider Carlisle food education waste program. To talk about one, the climate impacts that come with food waste and how we can kind of circumvent that and positively inform the people of Carlisle about food waste. But then also informing people about food insecurity and waste generally helps target some of those disproportionate impacts that they have on our community. So I think within the next year and a half, those would be my top two goals and priorities.
Thank you. And the next question is, you know, elected officials sometimes get questioned about their hypocrisy, right? And living the practicing what they preach, living up to the ideal. So I'd like each of you to sort of reflect on for us how you authentically live out what your ideals are in our community. And Rachel, you're first up, but go ahead and collect your thoughts a little bit.
Okay, I contemplated. I would say personally, my ideals are service, equity, and inclusion. Um, and I've lived these ideals and will continue living these ideals through my community service and involvement in the Carlisle community. Specifically, I mentioned today that my passion lies a lot with food insecurity, and my time throughout the entire time I've lived in Carlisle on Project Share, for example, illustrates my commitment to serving the people of Carlisle and their unique needs. And the same with the other various focus organizations and community involvement I have. And then in terms of equity and inclusion, my relationships and capacity to kind of network and support marginalized communities and the diverse growing communities here in Carlisle as we continue to economically develop just commercially uh, is really, I think, my main area of strength. And in terms of living those ideals, truly meeting everybody I meet with compassion, empathy, and understanding, and opening myself up to the, I think, shared opportunities and challenges of being human and living in Carlisle through my experiences with community service and with the diverse organizations I share is kind of how I try to at least live my ideals here in Carlisle.
Um, I guess my the way I try to sort of, you know, I try to live as sustainably as possible, and I am not perfect by any measure. That is like, um, there are a multitude of things where I think I can always kind of do better, and it's incredibly hard to live sustainably. I don't, I really don't drive unless it's absolutely, unless it's a real necessity. And honestly, when I do at this point, it feels like cheating. Like when I do, it's like kind of like, uh, it feels like I'm honestly even like kind of like, is somebody gonna see me in this car? Like I feel like it feels like cheating to me. And so and it's meant really learning about sort of what it's like to walk in the borough and to bike in the borough and for everything, right? For whether that's going to the grocery store to get a week's worth of groceries, or I think my wife and I also we selected our home to be in a place that was relatively central to where she was working. It's across the street from a park. It's the daycare my son goes to is behind our house, so it's kind of there's some convenience there in luxury in that we were able to kind of select a place that was in a very dense or in a relatively dense area of Carlisle. So there's everything from like what I eat, whether it's I think the last piece of meat I ate was probably like 2 months ago. That was, a squid at Kumo, and the last piece before that was probably something my mom made, which I don't want to upset her when I go visit, and or line drying my clothing, despite it kind of driving my spouse a little bit, taking over the living room, drying things in wintertime. It's so I do my best, but even I forget to turn off lights occasionally, and it's, I think, important to remind everybody that we're all human, and we make mistakes. We can't be perfect in what we do. So yeah.
Thanks. That's all I have.
Thanks. I just have one question. So, in serving on council, you're obviously exposed to a number of different perspectives, both working with other people on council, working with members of staff, talking to people in the community, people that approach here, and I think, at least in my experience, and I maybe assuming, but I would say others on council as well. You hear stories, you learn things that make you change your views or change your perspective on something. So, can you each speak to a time that you thought one thing and you learned something else, or you got a different perspective that made you change your perspective or your view on that issue? So you can kind of, it doesn't have to be specific to the borough necessarily, but just kind of a situation where you're what you thought changed because of for whatever reason, I suppose.
Sure. I think it's my turn, right? Okay. This actually didn't occur in the borough, but when I lived in Boston, my wife and I had a friend, Tilla Rodman, who was another potter, and her husband, they didn't own a car, and they biked everywhere, and we would go over to their house for dinner occasionally, and I remember sort of having a discussion with Tilla's husband's name was Tilo, and he was a researcher at Mass Health. But we were having a discussion. I sort of had this idea in my head that the way to solve emissions for transportation in the United States really almost entirely revolved around electrifying automobiles, and I think that's a really I don't. It's not that I think that isn't a solution anymore, but I think he really opened my eyes up to the fact that that's not a globally scalable solution. We really there are so many other problems with automobiles that it's whether it's safety issues or the health impacts of sort of just not having walkable neighborhoods, or there are emissions that don't even come from the tailpipes as well. There's issues around resources that cars consume. I think like half of the leather that's produced in the deforested Amazon is put into cars. So there's I mean, you can just and I think for me it took a while for me to really kind of fully realize that that one of the sort of key solutions to this problem is something that really solves a lot of problems. Not just the kind of perspective of let's just fix the emissions and I can continue on my life as normal, but really trying to kind of he really kind of changed my perspective on the problem, and so I think it took me a while to kind of wrestle with that, and I think it didn't really even fully land with me until I ended up here in Carlisle. So yeah, I think that's kind of one area where my perspective changed.
Thanks. So I think growth mindset and being able to be malleable as a leader is especially important. Constantly filtering and taking in new information and changing with it is a key tenet of leadership. And I also think of just being human, if we're being honest. An example of how I've changed my perspective on something is, for some context, I actually used to be someone who wasn't necessarily someone who thought government was a tool for good and change. For some background and context, I grew up like in some deep rural poverty in Texas, and actually had a lot of housing instability when I was younger. And it was through that period and getting older that I realized that actually government, especially local government, can be a tool for good and isn't necessarily just here to make you feel abandoned, but can actually be the mechanism in which you can institute change and policy to benefit people like me. And it's through my experience since then, volunteering and being involved in my community and in government, where I've really realized that on a local level, things such as ordinances, variances, those changes actually do have a tangible impact in your community and in a day to day life in a way I don't think I necessarily realized or could grapple with when I was younger. And so having that experience and being able to kind of see firsthand how that impact really affects the community has definitely shifted my perspective on the role of government and the role of like local leadership in government.
I wanted to follow up briefly with the chairwoman's question about public transportation. So you spoke about connecting bus service to Harrisburg or other municipalities, and you spoke about the walking pedestrian infrastructure. There's a good portion of households in the borough of Carlisle that struggle to make ends meet. 57%, according to the United Way of Pennsylvania, of households in Carlisle, in the borough of Carlisle, struggle to meet a basic household budget, and therefore, sometimes transportation is a struggle. Unfortunately, a lot of those folks are concentrated in neighborhoods that are, in some cases, the farthest away from the services that we have available in the community, the medical services, banking, shopping. A lot of the warehouse jobs are, not within easy walking distance. So, what solutions would you propose to help those without access to a car navigate the services that they need in the community?
I think
I think it's Rachel.
Rachel, you answered last time, so I think it's you again. Yeah. It's it's Rachel. Yeah, yeah. She's collecting thoughts again. Patience.
I just want to jot down my thoughts. Thank you for such a thought out question. And I think you're right that the sad truth is that the communities with the most limited resources tend to have the most disparate impact and ability to access the resources we do have in the Carlisle community. I think first solution is, of course, encouraging carpooling in the area and connecting resources for that here in Carlisle, especially in the areas that are not as accessible to the basic resources we need here in Carlisle. Secondary, we talk about connecting buses from downtown Carlisle to Harrisburg, doing that on a smaller scale for the key areas in Carlisle, um, really can make those kind of more accessible. And then in tandem, encouraging things such as, if we have a bike friendly area, making cycling, walking, pedestrian friendly neighborhoods more accessible to the wider area of Carlisle, especially when you think about accessing a grocery store or a hospital, etc., urgent care. Having those be more accessible and safe is a start. Of course, it's not the end all be all. There are a lot of mechanisms that we could use, such as busing, or even, for example, having a pickup option for people in those kind of more isolated neighborhoods that don't have the resources and means. And that also means developing our public transportation more and in a more localized way to ensure that we do have routes that are touching the key areas of Carlisle, such as our medical area and our grocery stores.
So this is something that I've thought about extensively, kind of trying to get around the borough without a car. I guess I don't know if you touched on this at the end, but sort of there's addressing it through land use by encouraging sort of like urban mixed use model of like having your kind of storefront underneath apartment buildings, and then I think that the big issue with that is we kind of have that downtown right now, but it's mostly filled with stores that don't they aren't essential businesses for the most part. There's a handful, like I think like Sadler Health, but like there's no currently, at least not yet. I know that's kind of slated to go in, but there's no grocery store downtown. The hardware store is we've got Lowe's and Home Depot, and both of those are pretty unwalkable in terms of getting to them, pretty difficult to get to. So I think thinking about like how do we increase trails, and my friend Jen, who I think is in the back, turned me onto this idea of light active transportation trails, which are sort of trails that serve non-automotive mobility. So whether it's you're in a mobility scooter, you're in a wheelchair, pushing a stroller, or on a bike, or on a little scooter, kick scooter, or something like that, it's sort of a way, or if you're jogging or running, it's a way for people to get around town. It's also a way for people to, access recreation in the town, and connecting those two essential businesses, whether that's, what's going in on the north side of town, connecting them to, we only have, I think there's 2 drugstores in town, if I'm not mistaken. I guess there's the ones at the grocery stores, but there's CVS on Southwest Street, and then I think there's one at the old hospital building now. So it's kind of like, those are, it's really important for people to be able to get access to those and not have to travel a great distance. Thinking also about like how we want to strategically place transit in Carlisle. What is like how do we connect not only to surrounding municipalities, but how do we connect within Carlisle, and make sure that people can get from their homes to those essential businesses, because they're really it's I feel like not using a car, you spend a lot more time getting to the grocery store, or getting to the hardware store, or getting to the pharmacy or pediatrician. So it's helping people kind of like manage that and do it in as efficient a way as possible. I think another thing is that there's kind of one thing that really, going back to the focus groups that we held for the Climate Action Committee, there's a woman, Allison Meza, I think was her name, and she brought up how she walked from the factory housing on the north end of town on Factory Street to Weiss, and she had mentioned that at one point there was an alley that she would walk through to get to Weiss, and that at one point that was just suddenly closed off, and that it resulted in her having to walk almost an entire mile around the block, around these sort of like it's not the Ribbon Mill, there's another building down there, to get where kind of McCarran Supply is, just to get to Weiss. And so it's sort of this thing like that. We need to make sure that that alley gets opened back up and is accessible to people on bikes, to people who are pushing strollers, pushing walking, and also making sure that there are things like benches around, which I know the borough has been kind of better about putting in benches sort of interspersed around the borough, because elderly people need to be able to sit down and take a break if they're even if they're not going to do an essential business. Like it's just something where you need to be able to sort of take a break and have a rest. And so yeah, there's a whole bunch of other things like addressing sidewalks, and I could go on and on for hours about this, so I'll leave it at that.
You went past for 3 minutes. So. Okay. Yes. Okay. Yeah. So we just.
Does anybody else have any comments? Okay. Hello.
I have one comment. After the last meeting, I did think about. Actually, I went home and I talked to my husband and I said how the meeting went, and I was like, yeah, it was like like a game time decision, kind of like last minute like thing that we didn't realize was going to happen. And he asked me, he's like, did you ever say why you voted the way you did? And I thought about it, and for a regular interview, like we usually have an interview committee and we all kind of talk, and so that's a public interview. So I thought I'd just say why. Um, and I've been on council for 7 years, 6.5 years, and I've been on different committees, and uh, I've been on ERCP, which is our employee relations, and we do ask folks to volunteer to come up and spend their time for no pay to put in the work. And some people turn over quickly, and some people have been on and they actually are there for too long, as in like Parks and Rec. Like there's people that have been on for 8 years and then they have to go even though they do great work. So I also sat here and did this exact meeting, and I was up against Deb Fulham Winston, and she won, um, and she earned it. I did do a lot of good work, but I wasn't sad that I didn't get it because I put in the work, but she had put in more. The last time there were good folks, but I voted for the person that I thought had really taken the time to put in the work and really understood what this position was. Um, and so I'm putting my vote in for Mitch because we have benefited as a borough because of the work that he's done. The time that he's spent on climate action, our climate action plan would not look the way it does if he wasn't part of it. And we wouldn't have a Vision Zero ordinance, I'm pretty sure, if we didn't have his leadership in that. So I just want to say that is why I am making the vote. That is nothing against you. And that's the thing. It's not about like someone doesn't have the skills, because you do. But that is why I'm making the vote tonight for Mitch. And that's just what I want to say.
I'm just going to say a few things, and I'm not going to reiterate what the deputy mayor said. But first, before I do that, I want to say that Sonia Brown, thank you for being here tonight. I think if Sonia had applied for this position, you'd probably be appointed, but but you don't want that headache. Sonia does a lot for this community, and we appreciate you taking your time out on this Tuesday evening during a week that's been challenging for you to help us out. Two, the borough manager was kind enough to send the minutes from the night I was appointed in 2005. And so it sort of got to relive that a little bit through the cold, sort of sterile words of the minutes. But I was reminded of Doc Cronenberg going through a series of questions with the borough solicitor. One was, do I have to vote? Because he's trying to squirm out of voting to start with. But the second question I think he asked was, can I vote for more than one? And of course, we can't do that. And I think it would be, if we had two vacancies, we'd easily fit both of you into that. And I think, as Deputy Mayor said, you're both very qualified. I largely agree with what the Deputy Mayor stated. For me, it's not just the 3-minute snippets or 5-minute snippets that you had last time. It's a body of work, and I do agree with Deputy Mayor that things like Vision Zero would not have happened without Mr. Shiles and his efforts showing up to land use reform committee meetings when he doesn't need to be there, and showing up to council and speaking passionately about the issues that are important to us. And I do look forward to, I think, both of you, no matter how this vote turns out, continuing to work for the good of the borough, because I think you both have passion for the issues that are important, not just to us, but to those who are most vulnerable in our community. So thank you both for for stepping forward, because this is an awkward situation. Sit here and be interviewed publicly, and you both did a tremendous job, and as did everybody else. And Mr. Evans is here tonight too, and thank you, Jim, again, for stepping forward too.
Anybody else? Well, I'd like to say something on behalf of the community because I'm a community member, and I just want to thank you for stepping up. Mr. Evans, you too. Thank you very much for wanting to be a part of the solution. I'm an executive director now, and I hear a whole lot of problems, and I've told my staff, bring the solutions with you. And so I feel like you want to be part of the solution, and that's rare. That's rare in today's world. So I just want to say thank you for wanting to make our community better, wanting to make our borough better, and wanting to be a part of that and doing the work that is required to do it. So thank you very much, Rachel and Mitch and Mr. Evans, for wanting to do that.
I should add one last thing. We couldn't get a judge to be here tonight, so whoever's appointed is not going to get sworn in tonight. But we'll work with you to get you in front of a judge to get you sworn in as soon as possible. We don't have votes to take as members of council that are critical, so it's not going to be a big deal. But we'll work with whoever's appointed. I guess we can hit the ballots now.
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Yeah, we can. Okay. Just the names. Some end of their name. Okay. All right. Sophronia Perry voted for Rachel James. Jackie Roos voted for Rachel James. Sonia Brown voted for Mitch Shiles. Brenda Landis voted for Mitch Shiles. Kate Mellon voted for Rachel James. Jeff Stubbe voted for Mitch Shiles. And Sean Schultz voted for Mitch Shiles. Congratulations, Mr. Shiles.
So, Madam Chair, to make it official, I move to approve a resolution appointing Robert Mitchell Shiles to serve as a Carlisle Borough Council member through January 5th, 2026.
Oh, I need a second.
A second.
Sophronia Perry, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And any opposed? All right. We have a new council member. Oh, not yet. Gonna be
Yeah, as soon as you're sworn in. And thanks again, Sonia. I'm gonna, if you don't mind, I'll just
Yeah,
sort
you
of close
please
this out. Close this out. So we at all meetings we have to give an opportunity for public comment. Is there anybody here who would like to provide public comment on any issues of borough government? Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely.
I just wanted to say to Rachel and to Jimmy, there are some openings for some of our boards and commissions. I'd love to talk to you both about serving in another capacity, if not on council right at this time. So.
I also want to say thank you both for applying for this position. It's been educational for me, and I think that Mitch, you're going to do very well in this seat. And Rachel and Jimmy, thank you both for stepping up because it is a big deal. I sometimes forget that it's a big deal from time to time, but it is a big deal and it is important to the community. in a day in the age where people, there are some people who don't understand the importance of voting in local elections. We are the first stop. It starts with us, and then it goes up. But it's an important role. So thank you for stepping in and wanting to do this. And I hope that you continue to be involved and engaged with us. We want to hear from you. We want to know what your concerns are and what your issues are. So I just wanted to say that, and congratulations.
I just also want to point out that at least Brenda's term is up and she is not able to run for reelection.
That is correct.
So in 2 years,
I next year.
next year,
You can put in, I think, in February to put in your petition. So I mean, it's
put it
right
in.
around the corner. And then you can have a whole election season next year. So
As someone who was recently elected, it's really not that hard. Like, I mean, to fill out the forms and, you do have to put in some work, but it's not scary. So,
Steph, do we have anybody by Zoom? Okay. Oh, yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Sorry, I feel like everybody else talked. So I just wanted to thank you all for having put your names forward to serve on council. I think far too often when we discuss elected office in this country, particularly at the national level, there's this cynical phrase that people are choosing between the lesser of two evils. And I would say very much so amongst all five of the individuals who put their names forward, that was very much not the case. And I think that this community would be very well served with any of you having been appointed to this position. So I just want to thank you all for the work that you have done for the borough, the work that you continue to do, and I hope that you all continue to be involved moving forward as well. So, thanks.
That's all we have. We don't need a motion. You can just adjourn us.
Oh, wow.
you want to
You use the gavel.
You
No.
told me not to do that. We're adjourned, everybody. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.